going to do a quick introduction. So hello and welcome to today's Info2Go webinar. My name is Annie Gaines and I am the Continuing Education Consultant here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries here in sunny Boise, Idaho. Our webinars and other continuing education opportunities are funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Everyone is muted and we encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions and discuss with other attendees. As you exit the webinar, you will be prompted to complete an evaluation. And as always, we appreciate your honest feedback. Today's topic is Leaving Your Stress at Work with facilitator Linda Bruno. This is a 90-minute session and we have a handout that goes along with the presentation today. You should have received that in an email, but I'll also add a link here to it in the chat. And I think we're ready to go. So Linda, thank you so much for being here. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Annie, and welcome everybody to today's session. Happens to be one of my favorite topics because it seems like it's needed periodically. It's one of those things where it's not flip a switch, one and done. Yay, we learned it, we're good to go. And that's why I encourage you to actually print out the handouts if you have that opportunity and follow along with those, because there are a lot of tips in here that you can use whenever you feel that stress creeping back. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like I've really got that under control, and then other times it sneaks up on me. And I see a lot of you talking about sunshine, which I'm envious of because today it is cloudy in Florida. So that's where I'm coming from. So thank you. I don't see the cat on my screen, but I have two cats. So I'm glad people are enjoying the kitty wherever the kitty happens to be. So thank you all for being here today. Hopefully you've got your handouts there. Let's get started. The first thing I want you to think about is the different areas of your life where you can work on actually leaving your stress at work, because it's not just a particular time period, is it? It's not just when you arrive at the front door of work and when you leave the door of work. It encompasses your entire life. And that brings forth the thought process that many of the things we'll talk about today, although we're focusing on work, please use them in your personal life. I have talked to so many people in the last, it seems like 6 months to a year, maybe longer, but certainly even since the pandemic has lessened, I've talked to a lot of people that just feel like stress is in the air. And so we're always trying to figure out ways to help with that. So the first thing I want you to think about is before work. So what can you do before work to actually then prepare yourself to leave your stress at work? One thing is to get fresh air. And I see that people are here from New York and Louisiana and Idaho and lots of different places. And so maybe this time of year, it might be cold in your area. If it's not too cold, step out and get a breath of fresh air before you leave for work. If it is cold, at least take the time to actually take a few refreshing breaths in and let them out again, because science shows that that helps sort of energize your brain, and you need your brain full of energy to be able to deal with any stress that comes your way. As I'm talking, if you have any questions, type them into the chat box. I will periodically ask you questions, and I hope you will respond in the chat box. I often find a lot of hints and tips that people in the room, so to speak, like to use in their own lives. So please feel free to do that. So first of all, before work, get some fresh air. Now, this is a word you're going to hear a couple of times. Meditate. Now, I'm not a person who has a meditation ritual, so to speak. In other words, I don't sit in a yoga pose. I don't have music on. I don't have a candle lit or anything like that. But I have gotten into the habit of making sure I have some quiet time when I'm stressed. One of the reasons that's so important to me in person, particularly, is because I am a high introvert. And many of you in the room might consider yourselves introverts, and introverts need quiet time to recharge. And I never really realized that until I read Susan Cain's book called Quiet. And it dawned on me, aha, that's the why I feel so discombobulated when there are too many things flying at me. I need that period of quiet time. So just for fun, if you've ever thought about it, I'll give you a couple of hints. Introverts like to recharge with quiet time or nature. They often process their thoughts internally. Yes, Quiet is a great professional development book, Magda. And her TED Talk, it's a 20-minute TED Talk. If you don't have time to read the book, Susan Cain, C-A-I-N, excellent TED Talk about introverts. But introverts recharge with nature or quiet time, and they think through things inside their minds before they share them a lot of times. Extroverts, on the other hand, like to recharge being social. They like interaction with people. That's what gives them energy. And they often process their thoughts verbally. So they might be thinking 17 different things and it all comes out of their mouth. And the introvert might be thinking similar things, but it's all inside their heads. Yes, Crystal, absolutely. That's why I think that book is so important. People can make you feel bad for being an introvert. Somebody walked up to me, it's been probably a couple of years ago now, tapped me on the shoulder at a face-to-face workshop, and she said, "Don't let anybody tell you you're an introvert." And I started laughing and I said, "Oh, but I am, and I'm a high introvert, and it's okay." So, yeah. And as recently as I think it was 2010, the American Psychological Association was still trying to get it listed as a social disorder. Now, there are social anxiety disorders that resemble the external appearances of introversion, but they're not the same thing. So yes, I totally agree with you, Crystal. They can try to make us feel bad, right? We have to give them permission to actually make us feel bad. So with that being said, how many of you in the room think you might be an introvert? Would you just type yes? That's all you have to type into the chat. Well, you all see that rolling by, don't you? There are a lot of introverts in this room today, and I suspect that that would be the case because I deal specifically with library folks. And when I do this assessment with people, an actual assessment that I've developed, or I do the personality profile called Wired That Way, what I find that is in the library profession, the bulk of the people are considered introverts. And there's also a thing called ambiverts, which is right down the middle. And some of us convince ourselves we're that and we're not really, and then that's hard for us to realize what we need from life. And then some of us truly are ambiverts. I happen to be, like I said, a high introvert. But when I'm in a face-to-face workshop and I go through this assessment, I ask them to stand up and go to a different side of the room, whether they're an extrovert or an introvert, and the room almost tilts because there are so many introverts and people's jaws drop. So the reason I'm telling you this at the beginning of this session is there will be certain things in here that really resonate with you as an introvert. There might be other things that resonate with the extroverts in the group, which is great. But just be aware that it's your responsibility, isn't it, to know yourself well enough to know which of these tips will help you. Because obviously, I've got dozens of them here, but not every tip is going to help every person in the room. So take the ones that you can use and then make a commitment to yourself to actually do something about this, because nobody's going to walk up to you and say, "I know you're under stress, so I'm going to take all these burdens off of you." At least nobody's ever walked up to me and said that. I'm still waiting. So I've taken that responsibility myself to make sure I'm taking off as much as I can as far as the stress burden. Shay said, "I like the phrase, extroverts always ask introverts to be more outgoing, but introverts never ask them to be more accommodating." Yes, that's true too. I'm an introvert, but I was trained to be an extrovert. And Magda, that's a good point. We do need to adapt, don't we? Obviously, I adapt. I'm not an introvert that doesn't like to mingle with people at all. I can strike up a conversation at the grocery store and spend 5 minutes talking to somebody I'll never see again. But when it comes to how I relieve stress and how I make sure my mind is fresh, it has to do with actually recharging. And you have to determine what's the best way to recharge. So meditation can be very helpful actually for both sides, because I often have extroverts tell me, I love being social, I love being with people, but there are those times when I need a little bit of quiet time. I just call myself a high introvert, Valerie, because I'm so high on the scale. When I take the assessment, I'm I'm off the chart as far as being an introvert. There are very few things on the assessment where I'm more toward the extrovert side. So I just call myself a high introvert. It's a term I made up for myself, Valerie, but thank you for pointing that out. I didn't realize I wasn't being explanatory on that. Rachel said, as someone who's an introvert, in addition to being on the autism spectrum, it's a double shot of stress in social situations. Yes, and that then becomes even more important, right, Rachel? To know ourselves well enough to say, what do I need to handle this as well as I can? Because nobody's got it down pat. I've not come across any book that says if you read this book, you will never be stressed again. There are some that kind of hype it that way, but when I read the books, that's not what really I find in there. So know yourself well enough to know what you need from what we're talking about today. So fresh air and meditation. We're still on before work. Valerie, if you could email me, and that's a good segue into letting you know that you have my email address at the bottom of the handouts. And I put that there specifically for people to ask questions after they attend one of my webinars, because sometimes we just can't discuss enough in the webinar. So the email address is on the handouts for you, whether you use it today or 5 years from now. I'm always happy to get those emails and I will respond. So I don't actually have it online or anything, Valerie, so I can send you a copy of it if you'd like to take it. And it's something that honestly I developed myself, so it's not real scientific, but I have read so much on introversion and extroversion that I feel like I've gotten a really good snapshot of how to tell where we tend. And I want to be very clear about that. This is about our tendencies, isn't it? It's not about this is etched in stone. This is I'm in a box. You can only categorize me as this or that. It's about how we tend to move through life. And that's how I've developed the assessment, so that you get a visual snapshot of what your tendencies are. And then that helps you decide how you should adapt to stress. So drop me an email, Valerie. I'd be happy to send you a copy of that. Know thyself, and that's what I was just talking about. But here's the part I didn't mention yet, and I'm probably going to step on some toes. How much of your stress is self-induced? I know that I've stressed myself out because I've scheduled too much over a period of time, or I've been talked into doing things that really don't bring me pleasure, and I'm really working on that. And one of the reasons I love what I do is that the things that I talk to you about, I continue to work on myself. I moved about 13 months ago. We have a homeowners association. I do a lot of activities. And when I moved, I decided I'm going to get engaged in this community. And I've gone to several activities, but first of all, I'm a widow. So I don't fit the norm of everybody being in a couple. So that's the first issue. Secondly, I'm an introvert. So I really don't love being there to begin with. And I have finally figured out that I need to just pick and choose the very specific things that bring me pleasure. Easy to worry too much, isn't it, Valerie? I lived in Marietta, Melissa, many, many years ago. Love that area. So how much of your stress is self-induced? But here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about, how much news do you watch? Ouch. How much social media do you get drawn into? Double ouch. Because whether we want to admit it or not, science shows that the more negativity we put into our minds, the more drama from social media we put into our minds, the more addicted we are to our cell phones. And yes, they're showing that it's actually an addiction, the more we are self-inducing the stress that's in our lives. So I'm not going to tell you to eliminate all of that, but what I am going to ask you to do is take a step back and really consider what you could lessen that wouldn't be so negative in your brain. I watch all comedies on TV. Before I go to bed at night, I watch an episode of Friends just because it always makes me laugh. But I also have one family drama that I enjoy. And there are times where the family drama gets too heavy and I stop it in the middle of the show because I don't want to bring that into my mind. Most of us can agree that there's enough heaviness in our lives and in our world that we don't need to actually add to it. Yes, Crystal. So what I suggest is, if you need to use Facebook for your job, and I pop into it periodically in my community because there are a lot of lot of referrals in there. Somebody referred a pet sitter this week and I need to go out of town in a couple weeks. So I'm going to contact that person, things like that. But even then, just trying to find that information, there's drama, isn't there? Wherever you look on Facebook, there's drama. So what I always encourage people, if you use it for your job, make sure that you're very aware which pieces are actually for your job. She says something my spouse and I do is phoneless movie nights. I love that. Put our phones in the other room and just watch a 2-hour movie and try to do that about 2 to 3 times a week. That is great. Shay, people get so mad at me because my phone is always 2 to 3 rooms away from me. And I've told people, call me on my office phone because it rings throughout my home. I have a home office. I will answer that. But if you text, it's going to be 3 rooms away. And even if it rings, I usually can't hear it. And I've done that purposely because for me, my phone feels like it's invasive in my life, and I just have chosen not to do that. How it's made. Okay, yes, I need to look at that. Too cute. I hadn't heard of that one. I'm on my phone a lot, so it lessens the doom scrolling. Yes, exactly. So just something for your consideration. There is a part of your brain called the reticular activating system, and it's a critical part of your brain. Every sense that you have, whether it's touch or feel or smell or hearing or seeing or whatever it is, everything that you sense about your world enters at the base of your brain. And there's a little piece of your brain that's called the reticular activating system. And when those things come at you as you're moving through life, your reticular activating system says, gee, Linda's been focusing a lot on negative stuff on the news, and there's so much coming at her. So I'm going to be really helpful for Linda, and I'm going to filter out the stuff that she doesn't seem to be paying attention to and make sure all the negative stuff comes through because that seems to be what she likes. Now, obviously, I have very much been facetious about that, except that the core of that is true. Your reticular activating system helps filter the things that you already focus on. It's like if you buy this beautiful shade of red car and you think to yourself, I have never seen that shade. I love that shade. And you kind of obsess over it for a week. The next thing you know, you've seen 7 cars that color in 2 days because your reticular activating system says that's what you want to notice now, even though those cars have been around all that time. So understand yourself. You are incredibly astute about what's coming into your mind. So I want you to be incredibly intentional about what you allow into your mind. Yes, Bob Ross, his voice just does it, doesn't it, Paula? Let's paint some happy little trees, right? So reticular activating system, exactly. Now, that was a very Linda Bruno explanation of that. The scientific explanation is a lot more complex, and I had to read it 3 or 4 times, but I actually heard my way of saying it, the layman's way I say, that I could understand from a podcast. And the fellow was talking about people that are out of work and they get themselves talked into the fact there are no jobs. Nobody wants to hire me. I'm too old. I'm too this. I don't have enough education, whatever it is. And he said, that's your reticular activating system looking for reasons why you can't find a job because that's what you've told it to look for. So that's how I heard it described. And it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think we've heard it in different phrases for many years. We've always heard that negativity draws negativity. It's the same principle, isn't it? So be really, 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 this is a key point for today, really aware of how much of your stress is self-induced. And then you make the choice of how you're going to overcome that. I love to talk about emotional intelligence, and the first part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, but the very critical part of emotional intelligence is self-management, and only we can be responsible for that. So, okay, I will stop stepping on your toes now. Be grateful. And I have down things really could be worse, and we all know that. Even with our jobs, things could be worse. But I told my pet sitter once, she said, well, I always told my kids things could be worse. And I said, I understand that. But when we say that, there's an indication there that it's pretty bad already. And so what I always think of is, what do I have to be grateful for? So I started a gratitude journal. It's been a little over 6 years. well, actually not quite 6 years. It'll be 6 years in July. My husband died in 2017. And as I was going through my grief journey, I read a book and it said, start a gratitude journal because right now you feel like you have nothing to be grateful for. So I did, and I wrote down, I'm grateful for my work. I'm grateful for my health. I'm grateful for my home. And the next day on the next page, I read, don't just write down your home and your work and your health and things like that. And I went, oh, and this person who was writing the book said, you'll run out of things to be grateful for, but you have things to be grateful for every single day. So this morning I wrote down, and I'm going to estimate this because I don't remember the exact number, but it was over 5,500 different things that I've been grateful for since July of 2017. There are probably fewer than 100 things in there that are duplicated simply because I look for things to be grateful for. It reminds me to be grateful, and I have to look for things to be grateful for. So this can be a great exercise for those of you who feel like life is such a burden, because it can be sometimes. What can you be grateful for? Start a list. It doesn't have to be a big, long, drawn out writing every time. I might write purple flower in the lawn because I thought it was so pretty. Or when I moved, I wrote that I'm thankful that the garbage truck picks up my garbage now, because before I had to take it to the garbage location in my community. So it's silly things like that, but it's amazing how it will make you smile. When I moved, I ordered a canvas that is a beautifully painted watercolor on a canvas. And my office is light blue, and the canvas has a lot of light blue and light green in it. But the thing that I appreciated about it is it says, begin each day with a grateful heart. And it reminds me on the days when maybe things aren't going the way I would like, that I have a lot to be grateful for. So number 5 says, get your stress off your chest. And what I mean by that is open a conversation when there's tension. If you have tension with a family member or with a coworker at work, the way to get that off of your chest and not shove it deep down where it's going to cause you pain is to actually open a conversation when you can. It's not always appropriate, but sometimes we use the excuse that it's not appropriate. We don't open the conversation and it just festers, doesn't it? And if you can't do that, have a venting buddy. Now, here's the key to that. Don't be the toxic person, the negative person that they don't want to see coming down the hall because you're always venting. Some of us know people like that. And I have gotten to the point in my life, somebody asked me once, they said, what if the negative person is in your family? And I said, well, obviously you can't get rid of them, because I often tell people, hang around with you bet people instead of yeah, but people. But when they're in your family, or they're a coworker, or they're somebody you have to be around, limit your exposure when you can, because you have to protect yourself, don't you? You're not going to change them if that's their natural bent, because some people enjoy being that way. And that's their right to do that, but you don't have to take on that negativity. Number 6 says, organize your day. You'd be amazed. And here's what I mean by organize your day. I don't mean that every day you have to spend an hour coming up with a to-do list and what are my goals for the day and things like that. But what I have found very helpful to lessen my stress is to just come up with 1 or 2 key things. They may not be major, but they're key things that need to be done that day. What often happens, I find, is that they're done quicker than I thought they would be. And it just lifts this burden off of my day. And I say, oh my gosh, I've got some time to do other things that I was hoping to get done. They weren't part of my key list, but now I feel a little more organized. I feel like I'm getting things done. So that might be something that would help you. Here's one that I alluded to earlier when I was talking about people. But let's just acknowledge and admit what we can and cannot change. There are a lot of things going on in our world right now that, if we allow them, can really bring us down. And I had people a while back sending me, a friend of mine was sending me emails, and they were all negative. This is happening, that is happening. And I finally said, love hearing from you, but please don't pass along the negative stuff that I have no control over. And I'm still communicating with him. I usually get emails at least 3 or 4 times a week from him. And now they're happy memes about cats or dancing goats or whatever it might be, but they're uplifting things now because he got it. So acknowledge what you can and cannot change. Try to not ignore, but at least lessen your exposure to the things you cannot change that bring you stress. So what can you change and what you may not be able to change are really important in you leaving your stress at work. Because think about what you can and cannot change at your job. I talk to a lot of people. I facilitate the Sunshine State Library Leadership Institute. We have 2 groups going through the Institute this year in 2 different locations, about 36 people total. And we occasionally flesh out some of the things they're dealing with administration or city council or the dean or whatever it might be. And then I sort of bring them back into the fold by saying, how much of that can you control? I often say to people, there are only 3 things that can happen with anything that's going on at your work. Either you can change it, you can leave it, or you can change your response. So, can you change what's going on at work? And if you can, I encourage you to open that conversation and see if you can make a difference that way. Can you leave it? And people say, well, no, it's my job. Well, in reality, you do have options there usually if you choose to do something different or move or whatever it might be, but not a realistic option sometimes. So a lot of times we cannot change it, we cannot leave it, but the one thing we can always do is to change our response to it. So when you're thinking about whatever's causing you stress at work, think about those 3 things. As a matter of fact, if you're willing to, and I know some of it will be too personal for you to share, and I'm not going to read them out for the recording, but if you're willing to, just type into the chat box for your fellow webinar attendees today, what brings you stress at work? No names, don't point to anybody in the room with you or anything like that, but just a short phrase about what's bringing you stress at work. What attracted you to this webinar that you thought, oh my gosh, I'm dealing with XYZ. This is why I need to go to this webinar. I will pull out a couple of them. The competing priorities and too many hats are similar. And what I always suggest to people is when you have competing priorities is whoever's above you needs to decide which priority comes first. As a matter of fact, I was watching a TV show last night and somebody handed off a big pile of work and the person said, what's the priority? And they gave them out of the 5 or 6 things they handed them, do this first, do this second, do that third. We're always afraid to ask though, aren't we? Because if we ask, it makes us look like we can't handle everything. That's on us. We're adults. We can say, I'm already working on this project and I'm doing this at the circulation desk. And so I have some time, but I'm not going to have time to do the 4 things that I've got in front of me. Which one is a priority? So again, if you need to flesh that out a bit, because obviously with everything that's been added in there, that's the reason I did it, was so that you could see that there are people dealing with a lot of stuff. I can't address all of that stuff in a webinar, but if you want to drop me an email, I can try to help you get your mind around it or maybe make a suggestion. If you like it, you use it. If you don't, you delete my email and we're all okay. So it's not going to hurt my feelings, but there are a lot of things that you see listed in there. Again, the 3 questions. Can you change it? I see a lot there that you cannot change. Can you leave it? I see some things on there that maybe you need to give that some thought. But the one thing I know is that if we write this down and put this in front of us and we say, you know what, I can't change it or leave it, it's up to me to change my response to it. So acknowledge what you can and cannot change. Maintain a healthy lifestyle. Okay, true confessions. I am struggling with this a bit right now, and I'm not quite sure why. I have been very focused on my health for years. Not perfect, but focused. I use the excuse it's dark chocolate, so I can have a piece of chocolate occasionally, those kinds of things. On the treadmill pretty regularly, unless I'm out of town. But for some reason, in the last, I'm going to say 3 months, maybe even longer, because it seems like it's been since the holidays, I have had a food issue with snacking. And I'm starting to get it under control. But here's where it causes the stress. I beat myself up about it because I feel guilty, because I know I'm making myself possibly unhealthy, although I feel fine. I know lots of sugar and salty snacks and things aren't good for me. So I always keep fresh blueberries. I put blueberries in my quinoa in the morning. I have to work at it. There are some people that have said, if you start exercising, you will miss it and you will never want to give it up. And they lied to me. Just being honest. I don't love getting on the treadmill for 45 minutes, but I do love the fact that I feel better after I do it. So maintain a healthy lifestyle. eat right, exercise, get good sleep. I bounced out of bed a half an hour earlier than usual this morning because I went to bed at the appropriate time. So be careful about that. I don't always do that. Drink plenty of water. Yeah, I don't know which part, Patrice, but yeah, that's a big deal, isn't it? Hate it, but doing it because I do feel better after. Exactly, Shay. And you got to keep it in front of you, don't you, that you feel better after, because it's so hard. Yesterday I had a fairly early appointment. I thought, oh, I can't cram 45 minutes in the treadmill because then I've got to cool off before I shower and da 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 da. And I looked at the clock and I went, you're lying to yourself. You can get on the treadmill today. And I did. Doesn't always go that way. So just saying, it does help with stress. That's why I put it in here. It helps with stress. So be careful of that. So we did before work, lots of things you can do before work to help lower the stress at work. Oh, okay. Yes. Exercise, Patrice. I hear you. Yeah. That's the one that we can laugh at, right? Yeah. Walking. We are coming into the 90-degree weather here in Florida. So that's not an option, which is why I have a treadmill. It's a smaller treadmill than I used to have because I have a smaller room and it's a little shaky. So I wish I had a better one because I've tried to use that as an excuse too, but I don't. So whatever you can do, get up and walk around your island in your house before you go to work. Just get some fresh air like I talked about earlier. So now let's move on to during work. Reduce the clutter and make it a habit. Now, here's what I will say. If you looked at my desk right now, you'd say, boy, you've got a lot of room to talk, because I am a very visual person. If I put a project away just to declutter, it will go by the wayside for days at a time unless I specifically write it on my calendar to get it back out again. I'm visual. If it's in front of me, I work on it. So my desk stays not cluttered, but it has a lot of projects out on it. My kitchen stays uncluttered. My bedroom stays uncluttered. My bathroom stays uncluttered. It's a commitment I made to myself. It's very easy for things to pile up, isn't it? So I've just made that commitment that there is one corner of my kitchen where my cats' food sits during the day, and I give them special water and all this kind of, so that all sits on the counter and it looks a little cluttered, but for me, it needs to be out there so I can remember the schedule and so forth. So be careful about this, because clutter is one of those very subtle things that can cause us stress. So during work, what can you do? Just one little area. If your entire workspace is cluttered, can you pick out one space that you straighten up and you commit to leaving straightened up? Because here's what happens. If you will take that one space and commit to it, over a period of time, you will enjoy the feeling you get from that. And then you can make an uncluttered, bigger space. If you try to tackle it all at once, chances are you won't have time and you will give up. So it's another consideration to think about. Keep your lunch or break time personal. This is one that comes up often when I talk to people about this, and they all sort of hang their heads. I tell people I'm at lunch. I said, yes, but what happens? Well, they walk up and they say, I know you're at lunch, but. So you have trained them that they can interrupt you during lunch or your break time. So if it requires you getting up and walking away, that might be a consideration. Just if you're on your break, go someplace where people don't expect to find you. If you're at lunch, if the weather is decent, if you have to go to your car to eat your lunch, do that, because it's so important. I'm going to call out Kumi's comment. We get 1 hour wellness time twice a week at work. We have a gym and walk prior to coming into work. Perfect. There are people in the room going, wish we had that. Oh, Melissa, I'm sorry, but I hope this is worthwhile enough to you, Melissa. She said, here I am at this webinar during lunch. But I hope but it is personal, isn't it? You are keeping it personal, because I hope you're doing this for you and not somebody else, right? So I hope it's beneficial to you in that way, but it is really important. You may not be able to do it all the time. Just don't get into the habit of never doing it. I had a friend that she actually worked for me in what I call my former life, which was a corporate job many, many years ago. And she would be so woe is me about always being surrounded by work. But then when she would take her vacation, she would go visit her favorite customers. And so she never really had any downtime. And I think that was partly because she felt needed that way. So we have to make that choice, don't we? If we feel needed because people interrupt us, then if that feels better than actually having some downtime so you can de-stress, that's a choice you need to make. So keep your lunch and break time personal as much as you can. Breathe. Remember, I talked to you might, instead of doing meditation, I actually have a little pink Post-it note. It's the only Post-it note I keep in my office, but it says breathe. And when I'm rushing to get things done, because that's just my personality, I look over at that and I stop and I go, if we do that 3 or 4 times in a row, we relax our muscles, we give our brain more oxygen, we feel less stress. So sometimes just breathing can be very helpful. Take a walk. We've talked about that, but we talked about it before work. Take a walk during work if you can. And some of you have already mentioned that you can. So take a walk when you can. It might just be getting up and walking to the back of the shelves and back again, picking up a book and re-shelving it, whatever it might be. But just those few seconds sometimes, if you're conscientious about it and if you're consciously doing it and intentionally doing it, can give you that mental break you need to lessen the stress. Get into your toy box. What do you have around you that makes you smile? What do you have around? Do you have a stress ball around you that you can use? Do you have a fidget that you can use? Do you have something that just makes you smile? Maybe it's a little troll doll, or maybe it's a little stuffed animal, or whatever it might be. Get into your toy box just for a minute and remind yourself of things that make you smile during work. If we were together, I would ask you to stand up and do this. Stretch occasionally. Just, if you're sitting there right now, pictures of grandkids, exactly, Kumi. If you're sitting there right now, put your arms up as high as you can reach them and stretch your arms out and bring them down. And yes, I did actually do that while I was talking to you. You know why? Because my shoulders get tense while I'm on a webinar. I'm so anxious that you get some of this stuff and you're able to use it and it does lessen your stress, that I get tense. And so it helps me to stretch sometimes. Or I'm sitting at my desk and I'm working for 2 hours on a set of handouts for somebody, and I know that I'm carrying that stress, and stretching helps relieve that. You can do that at work easily. So stretching is something that might be helpful to you. Here's that word again. You'll hear it again, just so you know. But meditate during lunch or break, whatever that looks like to you. Don't hang any special rules on the word meditate. Do what it takes. Maybe you need to meditate on what you would like to cook for your family reunion. Maybe we could call it dream a little bit. Just sort of release your creativity a little bit. I'm sorry, Michael. We are talking. Okay, I can't. I shouldn't say can't. It doesn't cover specific issues with workplace stress because stress is such a personal thing. But I'm happy to address whatever it is you're dealing with. If you can drop me an email, I'd be happy to do that. But when I'm talking about leaving your stress at work, that's such a personal thing, isn't it? You saw on the list that people were chatting about earlier, all the different areas of stress. We could probably take and group those and have 6 more webinars just trying to deal with those particular issues. A lot of it also, the actual stress is coming from people, and I can't really change any of that. So I appreciate that comment, but please, if any of you need to dig a little deeper on actual workplace issues, please drop me that email. Put your best foot forward. I read about this a few months ago in an article that was in a kind of odd magazine for what I was reading. I think it was in Success Magazine, and they were talking about different ways to relieve stress. And they said, if you can find some sort of a golf ball or a bottle of water or whatever, and take your shoe off and roll your foot on that, there are nerve endings there that hold stress, and that might help you release stress. Smile. Sounds silly, doesn't it? But a lot of us have the perfect melancholy personality style, and that's from the Wired That Way assessment that I use. And the melancholy word doesn't mean that we're unhappy all the time. It just means that often we're thinking through things. Remember, the introverts think through things. And so the smile that we might even be thinking about doesn't necessarily reach our face. But studies do show that when you smile, your brain assumes you mean it. So go ahead and smile. When I stand up and make my recording from my answering machine, I always stand up, I smile, and people say, "You sound so happy." And I feel happy after I do that because I've been smiling. And guess what? A lot of times when you smile, and sometimes it's not culturally appropriate, and I understand that. So we've got to be discerning. But if you smile at somebody, they smile back. And suddenly your day lifts in the middle of the day at your work because you smiled. Because there might be 4 people around you that aren't smiling and think that there's a law against smiling. And so when you smile, you lift other people up. Maybe your patrons are coming in, they've had a bad day, they're carrying around a lot of stress. Smile and help them through that as well. Learn to count to 10 or 11 or 12. And in some cases, it seems like I need to count to 41 or whatever made up number you want to think of. But it's called patience, isn't it? And in today's world, for some reason, this has pretty much gone by the wayside. And I think part of it is I was researching this a while back, and I was trying to figure out, when did we get so impatient? Because I think of, in the quote olden days, when people were farming and things like that, where it took all kinds of patience because you had to wait for the crops to grow and the animals to get bigger and all that kind of stuff. But it said one of the things that triggered it was microwave popcorn. It actually started with a thing called Jiffy Pop, if some of you remember that. And they showed a picture of it where you set it on the stove and it would pop and explode the tin foil and you would have your popcorn ready. And then we got into microwaves where we would have TV dinners and things like that. And then cell phones and texting. This is the microwave generation. Exactly, Heather. And so we need to be responsible for our own level of patience, because if we listen to the world, everything's supposed to go this fast, isn't it? And it just doesn't. How many of you, and you don't have to answer in the chat box, but just think in your own mind, how many of you have gotten impatient in the last 30 days because a website took too long to load? I have. Yesterday, for some reason, DuckDuckGo wasn't loading as quickly as I needed it to when I was doing some research. You know how long it probably took? I didn't time it. I bet it took a whole 3 seconds. And so I need to learn this as well. I am not by nature a patient person. Get it done is my life motto. And so this is one of those things that causes us stress, doesn't it? Because whatever's going on around us that we are impatient about, if we don't have any control over that, our impatience is not going to change it, and sometimes actually makes it worse. So learn to count to whatever you need to count to develop your patience. Here's another repeat, only because it's so important for us to get this. Yes, Crystal, you're right. Make sure you're not hangry, which is hungry and angry together, or either one of those by themselves, right? And even when we are sad or frustrated or just plain stressed, we can lose our patience. And if we take that split second, here's something that's not in the handouts, but ask yourself why you're feeling angry or resentful. Yes, exactly, Magda. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And I've heard sick or sad, either one. And we could add a lot more to that, couldn't we? Exhausted, because that's beyond tired, fatigued, all of those kinds of things. Worried would be another one, right? Because when I'm worried about something, that's where my mind is. So again, I know I've repeated a couple of these things. It's very intentional on my part because I feel like there's such key components to leaving your stress at work. What you can and cannot change. And like I said, many of the items you listed earlier in the chat, I wish I had time to read all of those, because many of those we simply cannot change. The ones we can, we're sometimes fearful of trying to change. If that's causing us stress, the fear of trying to change it, then maybe the only thing we still can do is to actually change our response to it. And I hope that I'm really making you think about that today, because it's an option we have in every situation. So recognize what you can and cannot change. Do a mind purge. What is in your mind right now that you need to get rid of? Think about what, just before you leave from work, here's how you leave that stress of favoritism and the rules. And I'm just going to scroll up there and see some of the things that were talked about here: negative coworkers and micromanagers and lack of communication and toxic coworkers and low wages and all of those things that you mentioned. Thinking about those, we carry them home, don't we? So I suggest that just before you leave, you decide consciously, you know what? Can't do anything about that stuff. Going to leave it here. Life is short. The hours you spend at work are a huge chunk of your life. But when it flows over onto your home life, it can wreak havoc, can it? I can remember when I was in my corporate job, I got very stressed out. It wasn't a political, as we think of politics, but it was a very political environment. And some of you have worked in those kinds of environments. And I got so stressed out, I started shopping almost every weekend. And when I would shop, I would feel guilty, not because I couldn't pay for it, but because 3 months later, it would still be hanging in my closet and I never used it. And so that's what was happening. I was carrying the stress of my work home, and it was influencing how I was spending money and the guilt that I felt from spending the money. I paid it off every month. It was never an issue about that, but it just was silly. So do a mind purge and let go of it. Another thing to think about, remember we talked about the gratitude journal, but another thing to think about the good stuff. My husband used to tell me to just leave already. Wow, leave the house, you meant? I know, Michael, it is easier said than doing it. I totally get that. But here's the thing, Michael, anything we try to change after today will take baby steps, won't it? Because there's some big things that some of you are dealing with at work, and you're not going to be able to just dump it at work. But is there a way you can write it down before you leave? Or write it down as soon as you get home so that you're intentionally letting your mind say, we're done with that for right now? Yeah, just leave work already. Yeah, absolutely. Except, some of us are very driven. And when we're driven, it's hard to leave it at work. I never leave my work. I have a home office. And there are times when I am sitting quietly in the morning, because I have quiet time in the morning, where thoughts come into my mind. And I want to say, leave me alone. I'm not working yet. That's what I want to say to my own thoughts. So what I do, I keep a notepad next to me. I write it down. It's released. It's just another little technique that I use to make sure I'm monitoring. Yes, exactly, Zach. Write it down, ball it up, let it go. I'd say light it on fire, but that wouldn't be a good idea. But in your own mind, right? Light it on fire. Let it go, especially if it's something you can't change. Do a mind purge. Take out, another way of thinking of that is taking out the emotional trash, which I might even have written down somewhere. Jean says, working constantly is almost an obsession with me, constantly checking emails, working through lunch, etc. And so, Jean, you have some work to do, don't you, on yourself? Because you're the only one that'll do it. Guess what? As long as you're willing to do all of that, people are going to keep letting you do all of that, right? It's called setting boundaries, whole different webinar. But it's something that there's something in us, because I'm the same way, Jean. And I was really bad about it when I was in my corporate job, because I needed to feel like they couldn't do it without me. And that was on me. They obviously could. I quit and they found somebody to take my place. So, it's okay. But it's something we need to look inside and think about, isn't it? Because it's not healthy to do that. Now, I will tell people I love my work. And people have said to me, are you ever going to retire? And I said, not if I can help it. I hope I'm helpful to people for a long time to come. So it's not in my future that I can see. I have friends that have retired, some early, some later. They all look at me like they feel sorry for me. But I said, I love what I do. Why would I quit doing this? I love helping people. So I don't think of it as work. But I do have to limit the amount of time my mind keeps just grinding out ideas and thoughts and how am I going to do this and all those kinds of things, because I need some downtime. I need to go out and water the flowers. I need to sit and pet the cat. So think about that. CL said, I'm struggling with that because I just started a new position 2 weeks ago and want to get up to speed. And that's okay if it's temporary, CL. From my perspective, I don't know if scientists would say that, but from my perspective, you do want to get up to speed as quickly as possible. Just be careful that you're not setting an expectation that you will always work at that level, because you'll burn out, won't you? which is another thing to think about when we're talking about stress. It's burnout. So here it is. This is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the mind purge of your work, letting the work items go, but also taking out the emotional trash, the negative emotions you have about the negative coworker, the negative emotions you have about a family member, whatever it might be. What are those thoughts that are coming to you? This is the self-awareness and self-management I mentioned earlier. What are those thoughts coming to you that you're allowing yourself to wallow in? I'm just going to be blunt about it. My husband, who was my best friend, when we first met, was a very negative person, very talented, very intelligent, loved him to pieces. But one day we were going to travel together for a couple of hours. He was going to drop me off at Panera to work on my workshops, and he was going to go buy guitars because that's what he did. And we started down the road, and he started in again. And I said, I think you need to take me home. And he said, why? And I said, because I can't handle 2 hours of negativity and sit down and do my work. Well, how do I stop the negative thoughts from coming, is what he said. And I said, you can't stop the thought from coming because it's unbidden, isn't it? You've heard of the word unbidden thoughts. It comes to your mind. The key is, what are you going to do with it when you recognize it? Are you going to wallow in it, which is what he tended to do? Or are you going to release it or reframe it or whatever you need to do to handle it? And so he kept working on that all throughout his life. And when he got sick with cancer, he ended up, after 9 years of dealing with the radiation effects and so forth, on a feeding tube. And I walked into the bedroom one day, and he had tongue cancer, and he couldn't move his head very well because of the radiation treatments. And he had his head down. And I said, what's wrong? And he looked at me and he said, I'm so sorry, I'm being negative. And it broke my heart. And I sat down on the floor and looked at him, and I said, please don't ever apologize for that, because if anybody has a right to be right now, you do. And we just needed to get that out in the open. But he recognized that those negative thoughts were really working on him. And he tried to overcome that, even in those rather dire circumstances. So it's up to us, isn't it? Take out the trash when that thought comes, and it will. Let me be perfectly clear about that. You can lessen some of them by the things we're talking about, but you're not going to get rid of all negative thoughts. And then it comes and you go, you know what I do? I say out loud, honestly, to myself, the cats are sometimes around, this is not serving me well. The next time you start wallowing, let's just call it dwelling, because that sounds a little kinder and gentler so that I don't step on too many toes. But the next time you start dwelling on the negative, and you've spent hours or days doing that, I want you to say out loud, this isn't serving me well, because it's not, I promise you. Or as Dr. Phil used to say, he would lean across the table to somebody he knew was making up a story to try to cover their tracks, and he'd say, how's that working for you? And I've said that to myself. Here comes a thought. That is so true. It is, isn't it? You don't want them to come, but they come anyway. They're uninvited. So figure out what you're going to do with them. So we did before work, during work, after work. I want you to actually visualize physically leaving your stress at work. I've got a little exercise here after this slide that will help you do that. But visually, physically, like as if you're doing something with the stress that you could carry out that door and leave it at work. Or develop your own little ritual. What's that look like? Maybe you need to take a Post-it note and just put it on your monitor before you leave work. That's your ritual. It's stress. I'm leaving it right here, whatever it might be. Before you leave, figure out a way to unwind, because you don't want to carry it home. I don't care if you live alone. If you live alone, it can sometimes be worse because you carry it home and you ruminate over it, don't you? You just think about it, roll it around in your mind. You actually make it bigger. You start with the what ifs, and the what ifs almost always, unless you're intentional, spiral down, don't they? So before you leave, unwind. And here's the exercise that I was talking about. And this is a real exercise that a friend of mine did. When I was very young and I was working in that corporate job, this fellow was the credit manager. And it was an extremely negative job because people weren't paying their bills and he was having to collect and all those kinds of things. But he was always happy. And I said, how can you stay happy in this kind of a job? I was, I don't know, young, like 19. And he smiled at me and said, Linda, you see that hall tree right there? That was in the days where we had hall trees in our offices to hang our jackets on and things like that. And I said, yeah. And he said, every night when I get out of this desk chair. I walk over to that and I hang up all the things that have burdened me for the day. And I'm rewording that because it's been many years since he said it, but the idea is there. And he actually physically did that. He didn't have anything in his hands. He just went over there and consciously made this effort. I thought it was brilliant for him to do that. And then he said, you know why? Because when I come in the next day, I can pick it back up and start all over again. So hang it up. Don't put any names to negative coworkers or unhappy patrons. But if you need to have some kind of a little, I don't use it for this, but I have a little banana stand thing in my office to hang my headset on. But you could use something like that where you just put them on there at night. I bet it would make you smile to do that. So I'm glad some of you are using this because I love it. I do it mentally. I don't have anything physical to do it with, but I have French doors in my office, in my home. And when I close the French doors, we're done. Now, a thought may come and I may have to run back in and write something down or write it down on my tablet. But if I come into my office, let's say on a Saturday night, I have a little cat. I have two of them. My little cat will stand outside the door and start yelling at me. I don't know how she knows it's Saturday night, but I get the message pretty clear that you're not supposed to be in there. It's Saturday night. So just think of a way to do this for yourself, folks, because it can be so very helpful to you. And that's what I'm here to do. I will also tell you about a book that I read probably 6 or 8 months ago. It's a fairly new book. It's called Soundtracks, and it's by John Acuff, A-C-U-F-F. And what he talks about is our self-talk. Remember, I talked about taking out the trash, do a mind purge. I joke that I've been talking to people about self-talk for almost 20 years. He wrote a book with a really cool title and made $1 million. So it's okay, as long as I can help people. But when I read the book, I was nodding my head the whole time. Yes, yes, this is what I'm talking to people about. What are you saying inside your head? Are you saying things like, she always does that. He never does this. I'll never be any better at this. What are you saying inside your head that's creating? Remember, I said how much of this is self-induced. What are your soundtracks? It's called Soundtracks. And I don't know how to pronounce your name. It looks like a beautiful name, but I don't want to mispronounce it. But it was asked, could I please repeat the name of the book? It's called Soundtracks, and it's by John, Jon Acuff, A-C-U-F-F. And it's just one of those things that, even though it reiterates everything I've been talking about all these years, I loved reading that book. I even bought some little fake CDs to take for my Leadership Institute for their graduation next month to remind them to think about, you're welcome, to think about what their soundtracks are. That could be a visual for you. They're on Amazon or something. They're just cardboard, very light cardboard or whatever. They look like a vinyl record is what they look like, but you can write on the back of them. Thank you, Magda. I love working with library folks because somebody's always got access to whatever I'm talking about. So thank you for doing that. Heading out the door. Smile. Yeah, it's been a rough day. Fake it till you make it. Think of something that will make you smile. Thanks, Shay. Let me know if I can help in the future. Drop me an email. Head out the door. Smile. What is something that makes you smile? Keep a comforting scent. They've shown that scents help us lift our spirits. Number 3 of after work was before you leave. Oh, did I not say that one? Let me go back. Oh, before you leave, unwind. Yes. Do something to unwind before you leave. Do those stretches, do that mind purge, whatever it is, but something to unwind. So smile, keep a comforting scent, because they do show that scents can lift your spirits. Lavender is often one that lifts people up. Sometimes it's vanilla or cinnamon or a scent from your childhood. You might even have something at work that you can, I don't recommend candles, obviously. Most places would not allow those, but there are a lot of little aromatic kinds of things. Yes, thank you, Kumi. So keep a comforting scent in your car for the commute on the way home. Make your commute home a peaceful experience. Excuse me, where I used to live in Ocala, Florida, it's They call themselves the horse capital of the world. Now, when I moved there, I loved the thought of that because I love animals. I've since realized that in many cases they're a commodity, but they're still beautiful to watch in those big farms over in that area. And it was one of the things that made me hesitate about moving. I moved about 2.5 hours away to be closer to my niece. And it's a beautiful area full of nature where I'm at, but the horses aren't here anymore. But I would actually take a different route into town if I was meeting with somebody so that I could go by the horse farms. It took 5 minutes longer, but guess what? I knew it would take 5 minutes longer. I didn't get stressed about the time because I allowed for it. It was much more pleasant than sitting in what we called our State Road 200 parking lot. So make your commute home a peaceful experience. I try when I travel for my work, when I can, to not take major highways because they stress me from the minute I start to get on the ramp. People are mean. People are driving way too fast. They're not paying attention. And so when I can, if it's not going to add an hour or two to my trip, I will actually take state roads because it's a lot more pleasant. Valerie said, yes, you're right. Aromatics can cause migraines. Yeah, you would want to be considerate, keep it in a drawer or someplace where if you just have it handy, you could use it, but certainly at home, you could use it. But thank you for pointing that out, Valerie. It wasn't something that I thought about in the workplace, so I appreciate that. Audiobooks are great for a lot of people. I'm visual, so an audiobook, I will drive down the road for a half an hour and think, I wonder what they just said. And then I have to rewind the thing back to where it went just because I'm a visual person. So that's not helpful to me, but it is to a lot of people. So yes, absolutely. Make it peaceful. Get a good night's rest. We talked about sleep being important before work. Uplifting music. Yes, exactly. Whatever does that for you to make it peaceful going home, because that's the way you leave your stress at work, folks. Whatever was in your list earlier in the chat. Do something for yourself. Don't, I'm probably going to step on some toes here, but I've read some on the fact that when we listen to loud crashing music, we could listen to it for a little while to release our angst, but if we continue to listen to it, it builds angst. So just saying, I don't know. I don't listen to that kind of music, but just saying that might be a consideration to think about. Get a good night's rest. Learn to nurture yourself. Would you type into the chat box how you nurture yourself? Yourclassical.org. Oh, I like that. Yes, and there on YouTube, if you put in relaxing jazz music or something like that, there are a number of actual videos that come up, and a lot of them are coffee shops and it's raining outside, and then this soft jazz classical kind of music is playing, and it's so peaceful. Oh, I love these comments. I'm not going to read them because there are so many of them, but I love that. Look at these folks. Take some ideas from this. What do you do to nurture yourself? I'm going to give that a minute because I think some of you could take some ideas from this. Thank you for sharing those. Hopefully you'll read through those and maybe something will pop up for you that will help you nurture yourself. Make sure you have some real downtime, whatever that looks like for you. It might be downtime having coffee with friends. It might be downtime reading, as some of you said. But when you figure out what your downtime is, please protect it. The world will crash in on you as much as you will let it crash in on you. That includes family, friends, work, whatever. Whatever that is for you, whatever your downtime is. And it might only be 5 minutes to start with. And hopefully you can build up from there, but protect it. I read a t-shirt once in a catalog and I always threatened to buy it, but I don't wear t-shirts very often, so I didn't buy it. But it says, my quiet time is for the safety of others. So let that sink in for a minute. I protect my quiet time. My neighbors know not to interrupt my quiet time, not because I'm an ogre, but because they just know I have this ritual and that's what I do in the morning. I get my book and my cats and my journal and a cup of coffee and I have my quiet time. So protect it, because if you don't, everything will crowd in on you. Learn how to play. What do you do to play? Whatever that looks like for you. Playing for me is cats. This morning while I was eating my breakfast at the breakfast bar, my little skittish cat jumped up on the chair behind me. And whenever she does that, it's as if she's saying, yoo-hoo, I'm here. Time for you to tickle me. Which sounds silly, but I got off of my stool and I went over to the chair, and she then flops down onto the chair seat. She was on the top of the chair, and she'll roll over on her back, and I reach down, and then it's a tickle fight, if you will, which sounds really stupid, but that's how we play. And it's only for probably 30 seconds. And then she gets up and runs away, but it's like her little time with me, and that's what we do. So whatever that looks like for you, learn how to play. Okay, stepping on some toes. Hope y'all wore your steel-toed boots today, because I know I'm stepping on some toes with some of these things, but figure a way to log off. I have gotten into the habit, probably 85% of the time, that when I turn my computer off on Saturday night, it doesn't come back on until Monday morning. And I do that intentionally because I know emails might come through that I feel like I need to answer. I feel like I need to read. And all of a sudden, even if it's friend emails, they feel like work because I'm sitting at my work computer. Yeah, Michael, they're characters, aren't they? They are currently, the two of them are in two separate bedrooms because they also like when I'm in here, they can hear me on a webinar. And so they will get into a fight and start knocking things off of counters and so forth. Yeah, just so they try to get my attention. So they are sequestered in their own rooms, but do log off. I know that you can't always do that. And I know that for some of you, you may have things online or on your phone that do bring your peace. There's an app called Calm that helps people, things like that, but just be aware. I read a study a while back that said, if you take your cell phone and you put it upside down and behind you, there is a part of your brain that is still focused on your cell phone because it knows somebody might text you. There might be something on there that you need to see. And there's a part of your brain that has become so attached to your cell phone that it actually is not paying attention to everything else, even if your phone's behind you and upside down. So it's something to think about. Oh, insight timer. That's another one to think about as an alternative to Calm. But be careful of how much you expose yourself to screens, because we're hearing all kinds of studies coming out that we really need to be intentional about limiting that time. I'm not saying limiting it to 30 minutes or anything like that, but most of you are on screens all day long. Is there a way you could get away from that a little bit in the evening or whatever your shift might end? Aha, there it is again. You knew I was going to sneak it again somewhere, right? So after work, find a way to exercise. I do not exercise after work because I've already showered and cleaned up for the day. And so I do mine in the morning. But just giving you that option. You can exercise before work or after work, but do get some exercise. Many of you mentioned as something that brings you some joy and peace is to read. You know, everybody thinks that's all you do at work, right? I've heard that comment so many times from people that that's all library folks do is read at work. Obviously, many of us like to read. So take the time to read something that's going to lift you up. Again, third time, meditate. You're going to meditate before, during, and after. And again, just that couple of minutes of freeing your mind, letting those thoughts go, thinking about something that lifts you up and brings you joy. Here's something that I read about that I found very interesting because I found it true for myself. When I change clothes after work, I'm much more relaxed. If I leave my office today, when it's time to end work and I stay dressed how I am right now, which is in a dress with my jewelry on and so forth, then I will still feel like I'm at work. But if I leave my office, even though I'm in my home, and I go change into what I call my house clothes, then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, motivational podcasts are great. My attention span doesn't lend itself to podcasts unless I'm doing something. I used to watch things while I was on the treadmill. Now the room isn't set up for that. So I actually read while I'm on the treadmill. But yeah, podcasts are great. I have friends that are glued to podcasts and they can be very helpful for us. But change clothes if you need to. Steph says, as soon as I get home, it's time for lounge clothes. Shedding the work clothes makes it easier to shed the work mindset. Yeah, it's proven. Sounds like a silly little adjustment, doesn't it? But it can help us. So be mindful of that as well. Clean, you notice the big if there? I don't love cleaning, but I've had people tell me that one of the ways they relieve their stress from work is they come home and clean. If that helps you, use this tip. Sometimes organizing or decluttering will help relieve my stress. Cleaning is not my fun time, but for some people it is. So that's why I said I'm including things trying to touch each one of you with something that will help you. Yeah, just like Mr. Rogers. Spend your time off wisely, whatever that looks like. It dawned on me a few years ago that instead of scheduling appointments when I have time off, I actually try to put them in on a day where I have work to do. For instance, tomorrow I have a webinar that ends a little earlier than normal, and I needed to go to the doctor. So I made my doctor's appointment for after the webinar rather than making it on Friday, which is an open day for me. It won't be a day off, but I've got some work I want to get done Friday. Guess what? If I go to the doctor, it feels like the whole day is shot. It won't be because I happen to have direct primary care and there's never anybody in the waiting room because that's how she schedules her appointments. But it would just be the idea that I've got that chunk out of my day. So instead, I put it in Thursday. And then Friday, if I wanted to take the whole day off, then it would be my time to do so. But because it's time off for me, I can plug any work in there that makes me feel better. Here's that winter night jazz music that I was telling you about. I call it soaking music. You just kind of soak it in and it relaxes you. This is just one of them. If you just put in the term winter night jazz music or coffee house jazz music or something like that, there are hundreds of them out there. You all know that. But think about that as a consideration. Maybe even in the background sometimes. I've taken up watercolor painting. And when I do my watercolor painting, which I'm terrible at, but it relaxes me. And so I've set aside Sundays to spend some time doing that because now I have people asking me for my watercolor paintings. So now I don't want it to become a job, but I put this in the background. And it's very relaxing and soothing. And so just what can you do to have some soaking music around you? Give yourself an internal workout. What do you do to laugh? I mean, laugh, belly laugh. I love, somebody sent me an email yesterday and it said the artist formerly known as Prince. And there was a picture of King Charles in a purple suit playing a guitar. If any of you remember the artist formerly known as Prince, you'll get that joke. But I laughed out loud because I thought it was so clever. So if you find that on the internet, you might share that with somebody. I just thought it was a cute little, non-offensive, non-hurtful way of giving myself an internal workout. So dancing baby goats, little kittens. I saw one come through this morning. I subscribe to an e-newsletter called Inspire More because it's all uplifting. That's the whole intent of the e-newsletter. And then they have a branch off of that called Positive, PAWS, I think, Positive Vibes or something like that about animals. And this morning one came through about animals being released into the wild and it made me smile. But what can you do to make yourself laugh? It's okay to be blue. Now, I put the quotes around there because you usually think of being blue as being depressed or anxious, but the color blue is proven to lower blood pressure and even reduce the perception of pain. It can improve sleep because it's a calming color. The rest of my house has beige walls. I haven't done anything different with them. I didn't want white. The only other color I could do for the whole house that I liked was beige, so we went with that. I have a lot of blue in the artwork and things around my house, but the office walls are light sky blue, and it's calming. So we've alluded to number 21 all along. Leave your work at work. Only you can choose to do that. There may be times, maybe it's summer reading, maybe it's the beginning of a semester, maybe there's some big conference coming up or whatever. There may be times where you have to overextend yourself. But the more we do that, the more it becomes habit on our part and an expectation on everybody else's. So be really careful of this. There was this thing going around a while back. It's died down now, but probably about 2 months ago, the big title in all the articles you were seeing was quiet quitting, bare minimum Mondays. Sunday scaries, all of these things that what is that feeding into our minds? Oh, work is an awful place. Why are they making me work? That's what it's feeding our minds. And although quiet quitting was technically supposed to just be about doing the work you're getting paid to do in the hours you're getting paid to do it, what it started to morph into was people doing the bare minimum. And I always said, and they were doing the bare minimum every day because they were frustrated with their work. Is that really the person you want to become? That's the key, because somewhere deep down, and I even read one article, I haven't seen any more since then, but I did read one article that said they had interviewed some people that actually got depressed because they were doing the bare minimum and they didn't feel they were their best selves, which I kind of can relate to. And I always said, I don't want to do bare minimum Mondays because then I'm going to have terrible Tuesdays. It's all going to pile up on Monday and then I'm going to have to deal with it. And I had somebody in the leadership workshop, which really concerned me. And she said, I call it suffering Sunday because I have to get ready for work. And I'm thinking, and I said, because I talked to them about the book soundtracks as well, I said, be careful of what soundtrack you're putting in your mind on Sunday. So leave your work at work. It's your choice to do so. It makes you want to shout, let out the tension, but not at someone. I have done that. I work by myself, but you could do it. This is after work, right? So you can do this in your car. And people have told me they do this. They just get in their car, and if it's been a really stressful day, they just scream, or they pick some song that they absolutely love and they shout out those lyrics. And for some reason, that releases those happy little endorphins that go swimming around in your brain. And all of a sudden, you feel better about life. So it makes you want to shout. What song do you like to sing at the top of your lungs? There are some fun songs to sing. Screaming pillows. Yes, yes. But you don't want to dwell there, right? These are ways to release it, right? Leaving your stress at work, you want to release it. So you don't want to dwell there. Sometimes we can get to that tipping point where now we are just sort of engaged in the negative part of that. So we need to be careful about how we're doing it, what we're doing while we're doing it, and so forth. But it's just that intentionality that we're talking about here. Shake, shake, shake. That exercise thing. There is a song some of you may recognize, Just Type Yes If You Do by Casey and the Sunshine Band, that actually says, shake, 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 shake. That's all I'm going to sing because I am not a singer. My husband was a musician, and somebody asked me once, do you play an instrument? And I said, I play the radio and I'm really good at it because I am not musical. Good. Yay. It's not just me. But doesn't it make you happy when you hear that? Victory said, nope, never heard of that. Well, find it on YouTube because it's just one of those, uplifting beats, and it's not real crashing and it's not real heavy and all those kinds of things. So think about that. What can you do? Shake it off with music, with a walk, with a run, with playing with your animals, with talking to a friend. What are you going to do to shake it off? Because I hate to say this, some of that stress is still going to be there tomorrow because the things that are stressing you are things that you cannot change. It's up to you to figure out what to do with them. Give yourself something to look forward to, whatever that might be. Fuzzy slippers, a cup of tea, 5 minutes of quiet, some kind of a class you'd like to take, some kind of a hobby you'd like to do. I saw somebody said earlier, knitting or painting or photography or whatever it might be. What can you look forward to so that you release that from your mind? And that's why I've reserved Sundays to do watercolor painting, because it brings me totally down from my work and I'm ready to go on Monday morning. So give yourself something to look forward to. Before you get home, do you need a timeout? Do you need to have that 60-second conversation with yourself that I am not going to drag this at home and create a vicious cycle? Do you need that timeout of some sort? Post a visual reminder at the entry to your home that you are changing your attitude as you enter your home. You've seen those little magnetic, probably frames that have different faces on them where you can move them around to how you're feeling. Somebody gave me one of those once and I put it on the garage door entering my home, but I always left it on happy so that's what I would see when I walk in. Put a picture of your family on the garage door before you enter your home to remind yourself, do you really want to shed all of the negativity onto them because it's contagious, isn't it? That visual reminder, if you're a visual person, will kind of snap you out of it and help you turn your focus back to, okay, this is life. This is my life that I cherish. And this is my life that I'm going to make the best I can make it. So how do I need to change my attitude before I walk through this door? So some other tips. Fire the committee. This is the committee inside your head. Most of us have some sort of a committee inside of our heads. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family, lots of alcoholism. I was told that I was not wanted by my father, and it impacted me for the first couple of decades, maybe 3 decades of my life. And he was on my committee. Now, let me first say that I respect the fact that he provided a home for us. We always had food. He never hit me. There was some emotional abuse, but it just was what it was. But he also taught me hard work and good morals. And I highly respect him for that. And I'm very thankful for that. On the other hand, it left some wounds, as I heard somebody say over the weekend, some scarring, if you will. And so I have to keep him off my committee. And instead, in his place, I have my late husband on my committee inside my mind. This is inside my mind. They can be living or dead, but I want you to fire the committee that says to you, excuse me, you're not good enough. You'll never do this. You hate your job, all those kinds of things. I want you to fire the committee. And you may have to fire them a lot of times before you get them out of your head for good, or at least most of the time. Who are you going to put on your committee instead? I want you to type, you don't have to type a name, but what relationship to someone that you would put on your committee inside your head to keep you uplifted and encouraged. Type it into the chat box to remind you. I love the variety I'm seeing pop up there. Look at this. This is great. I love MacGyver, Crystal. I had a friend that said she put Clint Eastwood on hers. She was a real brat. She was a psychiatrist, actually, but she was real brash and abrupt and very in your face. And it was kind of your make your day kind of a thing, you know? And she said, because I have other people that used to be on my committee that would bring me down. My husband will always be on my committee because he was my cheerleader. He was my encourager. When he passed away, my first thought was, I need to go get a corporate job, health benefits, all that kind of stuff. And it was almost as if I could hear him, which I didn't, but I felt like he would have said, you have worked so hard to do what you love. Please don't go back to a corporate job that you might not like. And so he's on my committee. So good for you all. Think of that. The next time the stress gets to you, think of the committee inside your mind. Even if you can't actually talk to them right in this moment, fire the ones who are not helping you. I've worked with people before, even in my current work, that just would make snarky remarks and be very biting and hurtful. Bullying, I guess you would call it, but in my mind, that's just life. People are like that, and I can't worry about it. But there were times when I would work with that person for a full day in training, and then I would leave and carry it partway home with me. I didn't carry it all the way home because I determined not to let that person be on my committee. So fire the committee, form a new committee. It might just be one person, might be 3 or 4 people, might be a whole group of people. Make sure you keep that committee well fed, right? Keep your committee well fed. You must create margins in your life, in your time, in your brain, in your thought process, in your emotions. Because if there are no margins, everything's bumping up against each other and scraping each other. And no wonder you feel stressed, right? I actually color code my calendar, and I use a paper calendar because I am visual. That's how I can find it in 2 seconds and I'm good to go. But I color code it because when I flip to a month's page and I see that there are 9 pink squares and 1 blue square and an orange square, I know that I'm almost overloaded for the month. because it tells me how many webinars or face-to-face workshops I have, how many personal appointments I have, what kind of appointments do I have to catch up with people about my work and so forth. And I know that I need to leave the rest of it blank. Somebody asked me for a date the other day, not a date, not to go out to eat or anything, but they asked me for a specific date on my calendar, and the date itself was open, but everything else around it was full. And I said, I can't do that this date. And they picked a different date, which was wonderful, but I would have turned it down because I know how important those margins are to make sure that I can leave my stress at work, because I'm protecting my mental energy. I'm protecting my physical energy, because what I do, I leave it all on the table for people. It's out there. Here's who I am. Here's what I struggle with. Here's how I think I might be able to help you. And away we go. But I have to leave those margins. So think about, do you have margins in your life, in your mind, in your emotions, in your calendar? It's extremely important. Schedule free time if you have to. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Can't be free time if I've got it scheduled. I schedule my free time. I have a friend that still lives where I used to live, and she texted me the other day, and the next day I got back to her because I hadn't seen it the first day. And she said, do you have any time in June? And so I pick a day when there's not a lot around it, because she's driving 2.5 hours to come and see me. So I set aside the whole day for her, and I schedule my free time. Good, Magda. I'm glad to hear that. Schedule your free time. Number 4 says, do something to lighten up. Life is heavy. My husband died in 2017 after 11 years of dealing with the cancer, which he was cured of, but the 62 radiation treatments destroyed his throat. He had to have his face reconstructed. That didn't heal. We dealt with all of that stuff and a bunch of other stuff. He passed away in 2017. The following year, almost to the day, my sister died. The day before my sister died, my brother called me to tell me my sister-in-law had passed away. 6 weeks later, my 36-year-old godson died. And it went on after that. I won't even bore you with the details, but it was a very heavy time. And I just had to be very intentional. There were days, let me just admit it. There was one day I remember, and it was only 3 or 4 years ago. So it was a couple of years after my husband had passed. I sat down in the recliner and I said out loud, I know I'm depressed right now, and I'm going to wallow in it for a little bit. And I sat in a recliner and sobbed because it was just heavy. And then I said, not kidding, this isn't serving me well. And I knew I would say that to myself because I use it often. I got up out of the recliner, I went back into my office, I got to work, and I turned it around. Do something to lighten up. And what I have on my computer is I have an email folder called Fun Stuff. And when somebody sends me something that always makes me laugh every time I look at it, I put it in that folder, so that on the days when nothing has made me laugh, I can go to that folder and pull up the artist formerly known as Prince, or pull up the dog that somebody's done a voiceover with, and the dog is upset because you're eating its sandwich or whatever it might be, or the dancing goats, or whatever makes you laugh. There is a comedian that has since passed. She died about a year ago, Jeannie Robinson from, I think, North Carolina. Loved her stuff. She was just hysterically funny. And I had a lot of her stuff saved, and I still do, because it makes me laugh. That's what you need, isn't it? To help you lighten up. Don't overcommit yourself. You know what that looks like in your life. And there are times, miniature times, where you need to do that. I certainly was overcommitted while my husband was sick. I actually am a late learner. So I went back to college. I'd only taken a few classes prior to moving to Florida in 2005. And when my husband got sick, I decided I might need a degree in case I needed to stay home with him and teach online, actually do teaching, because he did that as a sideline to his guitar business. He was an online professor. And I thought, okay, that would be a good option if I need to stay home with him. And so I went back and got 2 college degrees while he was dealing with all of that, and while I was working full time. And I was overcommitted intentionally because I knew if I didn't do it then, I would not do it, and I might need it. It was rough, but I had a goal in mind. I knew there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And when the light went out, then I could breathe again. So, and I don't overcommit now. I just don't. Not with friends, not with family. not with my work, because I'm the only one that can make that choice. So be careful about overcommitting. Reframe your thoughts. We've talked about thoughts a lot. When the thought comes, oh my gosh, this happened at work. Okay, how can I grow from that? What am I going to do about that? How am I going to take a positive step in this? What's a baby step I could do to make myself feel better? Reframe your own thoughts. And the last one is ask for help if you need it, whether that's a therapist, a counselor, a friend, reading something. I do a lot of reading. I have a book right now that I'm reading called Emotional Agility. Excellent, excellent book. Love it. It's what I've been working on for the last 20 years in my life. I've read a lot of books on emotions, and it's good for me. I do too, Michelle. I'm better, but it has taken me a long, long time because I'm Superwoman. I can do everything, right? No, I can't. I don't even want to, at least not anymore. So when I need it, I ask for help. My pet sitter comes over and she loves little projects while I'm out of town. And so I had tons of shredding that needed to be done after I moved because I finally found an accountant that could give me some true guidance on what I could get rid of with my husband's businesses and so forth. And so tons of shredding. And she said, I love doing mindless stuff like that. And at first I resisted that because I thought I can't ask her to do that. She loves it. So now I've got a big tub waiting for her of shredding for the next time. So that even those kinds of things. Do you need help with housework? Do you need help with whatever it might be? Ask for help if you need it. Some of you have an employee assistance program. If you need to use that, use it. That's what it's there for. It's hard to get through life on our own right now. So winding this up, and I know we're at the end, think about what you can do differently to leave your stress at work before, during, after, and anything else we've talked about. Would you just type that into the chat box as we wind up today's webinar? Not because I need to see it, because I can't follow up with you, but because I want you to make a commitment to yourself about what you're going to do differently that will lessen your stress, and especially your stress at work. So just type it into the chat box. I'm not going to read them out. I want you to make that written commitment to yourself so that you're more likely to actually live up to it. And I'm sure those will keep scrolling as we wind up the webinar, but I just want to say thank you for being here. And remember, if it's to be, it's up to me. Thanks, everybody. I hope to see you again in the future.
Hey, thank you so much, Linda. This was so wonderful.